From the Gigadenza archive, Article 2101. The Little Cards That Could. Any thrifty consumer worth their weight in loose change will be familiar with the smart purchase. The term does not relate to donning a tailored tuxedo before venturing into a local branch of somewhere that has survived the tsunami of online retail and flourishing a fashionable wallet crammed with non-cryptocurrency in front of an eager proprietor. That would be the vulgar purchase. Rather, it refers to a particular product, most often one of several designed to fulfill the same function, that provides both features and levels of performance comparable to those of its rivals, but at a price that would evoke intense envy from buyers who'd forked out for the crown jewel and fallen foul of diminishing returns. Take, for instance, this diminutive delight. The iPhone SE, a small smartphone that served a sizable user base by incorporating nearly every key asset of its larger and dearer sibling, whilst leaving enough in hand to promptly splurge on an Apple Care plan. I myself owned one, a tactical side grade from a 6S Plus after the latter failed to survive my Miele WT2780's gentle rinse and spin cycle. Yes, I was so careless as to actually benefit from an Apple Care plan, and yes, had a silver-tongued sales rep not persuaded me that I was the sort of person stupid enough to forget to double-check the left rear pocket of their cycling jersey, I would likely have remembered to double-check the left rear pocket of my cycling jersey and observed a bulge the size and shape of a vintage Appleton's handbook. It mattered not, for the neater SE proved the perfect successor, and on a mild February morning in 2019, there remained a scattering of old stock available at tantalizing discounts. It was the last iPhone to accommodate wired headphones without the need for a cumbersome appendage, an invaluable fallback after my fourth pair of warranted Powerbeats earbuds, guaranteed to resist sweat and water, failed due to sweat and water corrosion. It could be piloted by an owner whose dainty digits would have struggled to negotiate the girth of a phablet. It could be paired with an Apple Watch from the fourth and, as of reading, most acclaimed generation. Finally, every photograph and video documented by its 12-megapixel camera replicated the resolution and quality of those captured by its bulkier brothers. To summarize, it epitomized the phrase smart purchase. It was the little phone that could. And as each subsequent Apple product launch drifted by, millions of canny customers patiently awaited its spiritual successor, only to be rewarded with a litany of transient gimmicks, every one of them too big, impractical, and prohibitively expensive. Indeed, Apple's steadily steepening prices eventually rendered the very notion of a shrewd investment extinct, unless the purchaser was willing to risk ridicule from their trend-addled contemporaries and settle for last year's model at a relative bargain. When Nvidia's head honcho, Jensen Huang, opened the keynote promoting his master's revolutionary Turing fabrication with the words, "You're going to be surprised," toughened texture addicts who'd seen beyond a tidal wave of turgid speculation were swift to draw several conclusions. 1. They weren't going to be surprised, and 2. The greedy green giant would likely seduce the profligate enthusiast before the frugal veteran. Such predictions stemmed from an extensive pattern of past practice. Over 2 years earlier, Nvidia had unveiled the inaugural consumer-grade incarnation of Turing's venerable predecessor, Pascal, in the form of the GTX 1080. A year prior to that, it had been the turn of Maxwell, as made manifest by the GTX 980. Both of these had been premium products commanding bounties of $499 and $549 respectively, but each had been announced alongside a strategically abridged alternative, priced to reflect its inferiority. Chronologically, these were embodied by the GTX 970 and 1070. Though in the former case, thrifty pixel junkies had been able to partake in the latest trend on the very same day as their extravagant associates, whilst in the latter, Nvidia chose to delay releasing their cheap option by a month, enough time to persuade a significant portion of penny pinchers to abandon both their patience and a stash of extra cash. When Turing materialized in the shape of the RTX 2080, this technique was repeated with a further twist, namely that the traditional top-tier TI-branded model would arrive with e-tailers in tandem with its subtly truncated twin, a dramatic departure from clans Maxwell and Pascal, whose premium and flagship variants were separated by a period of 10 months. In essence, the Emerald entity was screaming, "Hark, CUDA comrades, why not seize the chance to own the better or the best, rather than settle for the good?" When combined with crippling price rises and an enlightening showcase of Turing's vaunted party piece, real-time ray tracing, it became vividly evident that Nvidia was pitching to an impressionable fraternity of aspiring enthusiasts in order to maximize their profit from the initial wave of purchases. Those enchanted by a farrago of pre-baked imagery punctuated by Mr. Huang's visionary preaching and garish PowerPoint theatrics were persuaded that the additional investment would yield worthy and lasting value. The super-savvy, however, refused to be beguiled by a torrent of suspiciously skewed reviews, and an influx of rushed benchmarks conducted by supposedly impartial influencers, many far more concerned with being the first to publish their findings than over the accuracy or value of the accompanying data. To these toughened cynics, Nvidia was saying, "Hark, CUDA comrades, why not seize the chance to pay 60 or 70% more than you did last time for an equivalent upgrade, but gain only 30% in speed overall, and please, just trust our driver developers to liaise closely with the game coders on titles yet to be released to ensure that this advantage will increase by virtue of groundbreaking technology that we've yet to fully optimize." And this cynical bunch weren't buying it. Indeed, the sequences devised to illustrate ray tracing's reflective aesthetics proved unremarkable enough to precipitate an onslaught of negative publicity. When observed in parallel with scenes rendered using traditional lighting techniques, even through jade-tinted spectacles, discrepancies were frequently less conspicuous than a gnat's silhouette. Controversy also enveloped Turing's secondary USP, deep learning supersampling, which purportedly harnessed the GPU's tensor cores to intelligently analyze specific images within a given scene and apply anti-aliasing only to those elements which required it, thereby suppressing jagged edges, enhancing visual quality, and delivering frame rates that exceeded those attainable using existing anti-aliasing techniques, and moreover, at a lesser cost to clarity. There were two caveats. Firstly, the feature's effectiveness depended on Nvidia establishing a consistent and constructive line of communication with numerous third parties, who in return needed to impart crucial data to allow optimal implementation of the algorithm, and second, the filtering process was executed at a resolution lower than the one specified within the supporting application, and subsequently upscaled to match it. When gaming at 2160p, or 4K, the user was in fact viewing resampled 1440p images, whilst at QHD, or 1440p, the procedure was carried out at 1080p, or HD. This led to claims that cosmetics were being surreptitiously sacrificed to achieve aggressively publicized performance gains, and before long, several established tech sites tested this theory by running benchmarks which supported the function and comparing a variety of native, non-scaled, and manually upscaled images adorned with conventional forms of anti-aliasing to their reconstituted counterparts with DLSS applied. Their aim was to realize an equivalence of quality and velocity, which, in the majority of scenarios, proved impossible, thereby substantiating Nvidia's original claims, though a significant number of steadfast critics continued to balk at the relative expense of what boiled down to two nascent assets that even their designer could not guarantee would become industry standards. What would pry them from the fence was an upgrade that honoured their existing investments. Astute and fruitful investments that had faithfully served their desires by transforming long, bleak winter nights into fleeting feasts of illuminating entertainment. Streamed dozens of suspenseful unboxings, arduous system builds, or bitterly charged rants to an exclusively agreeable audience before tackling the most rigorous AAA titles and rendering skies, cities, fields, and forests embellished with spectacular effects at a fidelity far beyond their alleged potential, along with slews of swords, spells, and bullets at speeds responsive enough for a bewitched player to dodge, despite most failing in a fit of infernal rage. All with a blissfully hushed finesse, and expending as little as half the energy of their amp-munching superiors. Such seasoned hardware hobbyists required a solution that allowed them to fawn over their clinically efficient part-picking with fellow armchair accountants and point the finger of smug wisdom at the financially destitute early adopter. Within the first 2 months of 2019, their prayers were answered. Buy 2 little cards that could. Though many ridiculed the RTX 2060's meagre memory reserves and asserted its limited quota of RTX cores would reduce DirectX 12 enriched 4K to a slideshow and render ray tracing as rewarding as riding a Harley-Davidson fitted with a Sinclair C5's engine, this plucky polygon shifter breached the acceptable minimum of 30 frames per second at Ultra HD in almost every contemporary title, and only faltered beneath it when simultaneously tasked with ray tracing, which was handled more than adequately at 1440p and below. Despite being priced at $349, roughly 40% higher than the card it superseded, the RTX 2060 still offered beefier bang for the buck than its Pascal-endowed elder, with an overall advantage a shade shy of 60%, and for those who protested at the extra 100 greenbacks or had little care to stand and stare at ravishing reflections, there was soon solace by way of the curiously christened GTX 1660 Ti, which sold for just 30 more of George Washington's finest at $279, a mere 12% levy over the 1060, but elevated performance by approximately 35%. By opting for either of these slimmed-down, supercharged siblings, it was impossible not to make a smart purchase.
It's rather strange that he neglected to mention the vanilla 1660 that's 50 bills lighter than the TI. And what about the 1650, a whole 100 less?
Well, the 1650 doesn't figure. It was a home theater PC card that thought it could game. Under 1,000 CUDA cores and only 4 gigs of RAM. Do me a favor. It wasn't even a proper Turing.
By what definition?
Well, he told us, no RT cores, no tensor cores, so no AI filtering or ray tracing. Oh, what's so funny?
I'm just surprised you didn't know Nvidia enabled ray tracing on GTX cards too. That's something else you forgot to mention.
I did know, actually. It was only as far back as the Pascal. If you want me to pursue that digression, I will. The 1060 specifically.
It's still a rather glaring omission, don't you think?
Oh, no, not at all. Who want to use a 1060 with ray tracing, other than to see how many cups of coffee you could brew in between frames?
That's correct, but what about a 1080, for instance?
Yes, I believe that's still only 20 frames per second, and that's from the Green Giant's mouth.
Well, then why enable it at all?
Well, perhaps because Crytek called Nvidia's bluff by demoing their custom CryEngine on a Vega 56.
Oh, please. AMD gets one fancy pre-baked showcase and forces Nvidia's hand. Nvidia had no reason to be scared of Vega.
Well, you saw the video, didn't you? Their whole stance on ray tracing was that it was Turing's exclusive party piece.
That's not the same as claiming to have invented ray tracing.
Well, no, actually. Mr. Huang said at the keynote that Turner Whitted discovered it, and that Turner Whitted was now a part of Nvidia's research team, so technically it's exactly the same.
I see, but his actual claim was that only Turing was powerful enough to pull it off in real time.
Sure, but with a 40% performance penalty.
That's still real time.
Well, no, I would suggest to you that in gaming, real time means nothing unless you attribute a frame rate. You could say, hey, look everyone, I'm running Battlefield 5 at 6 frames per second, but it's still real time.
No, come on, don't be facetious. He obviously meant playable.
And there's another subjective term.
Well, shall we settle on 30 frames per second at 4K? It managed more in virtually every case, but that's impressive enough, right?
Well, I'd have thought most would have expected 60.
And that's what they got at 1440p. Let's not split hairs. It still caned Vega. Even Pascal trounced Vega. When those red-eyed trolls saw that demo, they acted as though Crytek had suddenly discovered things that AMD had forgotten their own chip could do. Do you honestly believe that they'd have kept quiet about ray tracing if their chip had been designed for it? It wasn't even mentioned at the Vega 7 launch.
Okay, well, in returning to the question, if we may, would you care to explain why it was Nvidia enabled ray tracing for their older technology?
Well, let's see. Gamers who weren't initially tempted by the latest tech might well reevaluate if confronted by their old tech's shortcomings.
I'm not sure I follow.
Think about it. How better to persuade Pascal hoarders to upgrade than by allowing them a rubbish experience of something that could look so much better if they just spend their damn money?
So you're suggesting that Nvidia publicly discredits its own products in order to sell its own products? That's a bit risky, wouldn't you say?
No, not at all. It's just a proactive form of obsolescence. You said yourself that ray tracing was Turing's forte, not unique, but a crucial and profitable feature. Problem is, how can you profit from something that relies on software support as well as consumer uptake? And why would game developers bother to implement a function that most customers hadn't embraced by buying the requisite hardware? It would be a waste of their valuable resources.
What, and people not convinced by the hype all suddenly become ray tracing converts after first-hand experiences?
No, not all, but enough to make the strategy worthwhile.
And how do you know that?
I don't. I'm guessing, since we're supposed to be having this discussion in the future. If I'm wrong, I'll look stupid. Why don't we get back to the topic? Were these little cards that could, were they smart purchases?
Well, I have, or rather, I had a GTX 1060. I waited 3 years and was expected to pay virtually the same for a direct replacement. What a joke.
No, not a direct replacement, a direct upgrade.
10% extra performance after 3 whole years was the best they could manage.
No one was forcing you to buy it.
True, and that's why I didn't. It should have been cheaper.
Oh, come on. What did you expect? The 1060 cost $50 more than the 960. The 1660 was $80 less than the 1060.
Yes, but you see, the 1060 was over 70% faster than the 960. And it practically matched the 980 for almost 50% less. The present mid-tier should equal the previous flagship.
You can't have the best-case scenario every time. Nvidia was only ever concerned about eclipsing AMD in every price bracket, which they did.
And then Navi changed everything.
How do you know?
Oh, I don't. I'm guessing. Since we're supposed to be having this discussion in the future, remember? And if I'm wrong, I guess I too will look stupid.